Good Sunday evening to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our weekly tropical weather video update for today, March 9th, 2025. Let's start off today with a look at the NOAA Coral Reef Watch sea surface temperature anomalies, starting off in the Atlantic. Warm throughout the Atlantic, especially the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. It's really been very warm this entire year so far, especially the Gulf. No matter how many of these cold fronts that would come down, and some of them were pretty powerful, once again, pretty much to the point that we got a winter storm along the Gulf Coast, and still the Gulf remains very strong, as well as into the Caribbean too. Sea surface temperature anomalies running on average 1 to even 2 degrees Celsius above normal. And that extends further east as well, although a little bit of colder patches beginning to emerge off of Western Africa. Nothing too atypical though. Trade winds typically stronger this time of year. And it's still March, and there's still a few months left for this to warm up ahead of hurricane season, but still overall warm, especially in the eastern Atlantic and then off the East Coast. We have quite a bit of cold too. That makes sense given how many fronts we've had um, over the course of this year. And so yeah, it's colder off the East Coast. Definitely a little bit different than what I've seen in recent years, although we still have a very warm Gulf Stream, which probably means we have a very strong loop current, which makes sense as to why it is very warm in the Gulf of Mexico. Moving on to the Pacific, we have a very warm Eastern Pacific, especially along the equatorial regions. Still a little bit colder out to the west, but you could definitely see, especially when you compare this to a few months ago, our La Nina signature that we had in the Pacific has absolutely died out or is in the process of dying out. And we're definitely in the process of transitioning into a warmer ENSO. Just how much warmer is still yet to be determined, but definitely warmer than La Nina, that's for sure. And then we're also kind of colder as well in the northern eastern Pacific off the Baja Peninsula. This too is also something interesting to watch as we progress throughout the spring, especially when it comes to hurricane season, specifically the eastern Pacific, because this will have implications on that, but it also relates to ENSO too. And really quickly, I do want to compare this time last week just to see how much things have changed, especially in the ENSO in the Pacific. The Atlantic has stayed relatively the same, so there's not much to talk about there. But in the Pacific, you can definitely notice between last week, March 1st, so this was last Saturday, because this map is from yesterday. It's always a day behind the NOAA Coral Reef Watch, but I don't really think there's that much of a difference. But just really quickly comparing between last week and this week, definitely some warming that occurred along the eastern Pacific, and definitely a sign of La Nina continuing to erode. It'll all determine on how much this warmth continues to build and how much does it spread westward. Does this warmth kind of warm up for now, but it only stays in the eastern Pacific and then eventually it cools back down as we head into the fall? Or does this warmth advance westward and we get a complete basin-wide El Nino type setup later this year? And obviously that'll have implications on hurricane season. And you could even see it too with the warming ENSO. This is the Nino 3.4 anomalies, a daily graph, and just looking especially from where we were earlier this year in January, all the way down at -1 degree Celsius, and now the latest value as of yesterday is zero point 0.2. So we're now into positive territory, pretty solidly positive actually, warm neutral, but we're still not at El Nino threshold quite yet. And you can even see it on the T depth anomalies, just how much warming we've had. This is the latest anomaly graph of the sea surface temperature anomalies below the surface of the equatorial Pacific. That's what this map represents. And this is the latest frame, and I'll actually really quickly refresh it and just notice how from earlier this year, from January, where the picture starts, to now, notice how much warmth builds up in the eastern northern Pacific, the far right corner. This is the eastern Pacific near the surface. But I did find a few people point out that we still have quite a bit of cold below the surface, well below the surface. So maybe this is just the thing that we have right now um, in the Eastern Pacific due to definitely the trade winds have weakened quite a bit in the Pacific over the last several weeks. Makes sense as to why we've seen a lot of warming with the ENSO. But maybe once that warming reverses, there's still a lot of colder sea surface temperature anomalies below the surface to work with, and maybe that might give the chance for La Nina to come back a little later on in the year. I've seen a few people talk about it, so you could definitely tell there's a little bit of uncertainty as to how ENSO is going to progress. But it's March. We're just getting beginning to get past the spring predictability barrier before we start to get more certain about how ENSO will shape up for this year. We typically don't get completely past the barrier till we get to next month, April, which is also when things start becoming a little bit more certain with hurricane season. But it's obviously not doesn't hurt to pay attention to things now, and that's of course what we do with these weekly updates. Throughout the entire off season, we kind of see how things progress, and then once we get into next month, or even later this month, we start taking these signatures like El Nino and how much warmth we have in the Pacific a little more seriously. And then, of course, we have the SOI as well. Another indicator that we're definitely on the downtrend with this La Nina over time. Notice where we were with the SOI all the way over here. And this was in early February. We had a very strong 30-day average at 13 points. And now the latest average as of today for the 30-day is 2 points. So still in positive territory, but definitely has weakened. And that's once again a sign of the atmosphere kind of shifting away from a very strong La Nina pattern. And we're definitely seeing a shift in the atmosphere away from La Nina and definitely towards neutral. And so we'll watch this over the next several weeks. To see how further this dips, and do we see this eventually go into negative territory? At least with the daily contributions, though, over the last several days, they've still remained positive, if not just near neutral. So we're not seeing very dramatic numbers, especially in the daily contributions, like we saw, for instance, February 18th, negative 16. We're not seeing those numbers consistently in the daily contribution, which is tanking the 30-day average. So we're not yet dramatically on a path towards a very different atmospheric pattern, probably more in line with El Nino. We're still kind of in the neutralish sort of territory in terms of actual sea surface temperature anomalies, although we're trending warmer here, and in terms of the atmosphere. It takes a few weeks for things to kind of change, which is why we'll be watching over the next several weeks, especially this month. This month is a very important month that we watch for the progression of ENSO and how it affects hurricane season. But it also obviously doesn't just affect hurricane season. It also affects severe weather season, which we're pretty much in now since we're in the month of March and on our way towards spring. And I guess since we're on that note, here's a look at the Gulf of Mexico sea surface temperatures. Showed you the anomalies earlier, and it's very, very warm relative to normal, but at least in terms of actual sea surface temperatures, we're still colder along the shelf waters. Some of these temperatures below 20 degrees, even see as low as 17, maybe 16 degrees Celsius, which I think would probably be 50s or 60s Fahrenheit, somewhere around there, I'd assume, along the Gulf Coast, and then further down into the southern Gulf. Not quite there yet with the 26-degree isotherm mark that's still kind of tucked into the southern Gulf, but it's starting to creep its way up in the Bay of Campeche, and we're getting occasional readings, I guess, of 26 degrees. We're kind of right in probably where I assume around the loop current or the Gulf Stream is flowing in through here. But overall, lower to mid 20s right now throughout majority of the Gulf, and that's warm. at least relative to normal for this time of year. So lots of ample moisture that the Gulf has, and especially when that moisture is transported northward, it obviously makes for a very good setup for severe weather, which might be something of concern later this upcoming week once again. So we have to watch for that. And then, really quickly, before we move on to that, sea surface temperature look across the entire general Western Atlantic. Low to mid 20s in the Gulf, and then in the Caribbean, generally the entire Caribbean right now sitting at least 26 degrees Celsius, so right at the mark that we typically look for hurricanes. The Caribbean, no matter what, will really always be warm enough for tropical development, but obviously, since it's March, atmospherically, we're not there. But obviously, in terms of sea surface temperatures, we have 26 throughout the entire Caribbean and even some 28s. And this is definitely going to get warmer than where we are now, especially now that we're in March and we're heading towards summer very soon. And things only get warmer throughout the entire Atlantic from here on outward. All right, so moving on to United States weather, as I mentioned, we might have a severe weather outbreak to watch later this week. Get to that in just a moment. But what about what's going on right now across the U.S.? Well, not much. There's some flooding for portions of northern Florida. A system is going to be moving in, or a system is moving through right now across the southeast, and it's going to bring rain to the Carolinas tomorrow. So a dreary day for those if you are making plans to travel outside. So definitely stay indoors if you don't want to be in the rain. Throughout the Midwest, though, strong gusty winds and very dry conditions. There's even high wind warnings in effect for the Dakotas and even Montana. And because of that, obviously, strong winds and very dry air triggers red flag warnings, and this is in effect, especially for tomorrow. So be aware of that as well. We've had quite a bit in terms of red flag warning situations, especially several months ago in Southern California. So if you're in the red flag warning area, be careful. Don't set off any fires, especially since in these conditions they can spread very quickly and sometimes lead to big wildfires. So take those precautions, or at least the precautions that you normally would in that situation. And then we have some winter storm warnings in effect for the mountains of the Carolinas next week. Going to have a very powerful system move into the west, and then that's going to progress eastward and bring some inclement weather here in the eastern half of the United States, and that obviously moves on to our next kind of issue, and that is severe weather. Trying to find a way to transition smoothly. Sometimes it doesn't always work, but we're going to have a system. It's going to move eastward, going to bring snow and inclement weather to the west, and then it's going to move east and bring inclement weather and severe weather to the east, and that's going to happen throughout the week. And then by late next week, as we head into the weekend, we'll have severe weather to talk about. This is the day 6 outlook for the Storm Prediction Center, so I guess this is Friday. And you have a 15% chance hatched all the way from pretty much southern Texas and the Gulf Coast up to the Midwest, Iowa, and Illinois. Very widespread area for 15% chance, especially this far out. So definitely a pretty significant chance there is. And 15% chance this far out, day 6, you would probably assume they would at least issue an enhanced risk once this gets to the day 3 outlook. Maybe a moderate if conditions warrant, but we'll see. But definitely when you see a signature like this, this far out in the outlook, that is definitely a sign of a pretty significant severe weather event ahead. And then day 7, there's also the threat too. Does narrow down to the Dixie Alley region in the Gulf Coast states, so Alabama, Mississippi, and I guess a little bit of the general southeast, or I guess you would say the deep south. We have another 15% chance then, and then day 8, predictability too low. But this is Friday and Saturday. Storm Prediction Center has heightened risks for severe weather. And then if we see that play out on the modeling, I'll just take you out in time really quickly. Tomorrow, generally throughout most of the day, low pressure across northern Florida and southern Georgia, going to bring rain to the southeast tomorrow, and probably some flooding conditions depending on where you are. And then that moves out on Tuesday. Low pressure crashes into Southern California, so if you're if you're in SoCal, might get some rain Tuesday and Wednesday, and then we have a storm system that moves into the Pacific Northwest on Thursday. And you can see here on the GFS indicates very heavy snow for the mountain California regions. And then a very strong low pressure develops over the northern Midwest Friday and into Saturday. Look at that, 972 millibars. Winter storm for portions of the Dakotas into Saturday and Friday evening. And then obviously throughout the South, we're going to have a very strong cold front that'll develop and bring severe weather Friday night into early Saturday. Then it seems like there's another sort of system that develops behind that and brings another round Saturday night into Sunday. And then that moves to the north and brings rain to the northeast. So quite a bit of active weather upcoming this week, and it's only going to ramp up from here on out as we get further into spring. Severe weather season is only going to ramp up, and especially, as I mentioned before, with a very warm Gulf, there will be a lot of moisture to supply for probably multiple severe weather outbreaks, and we'll probably have a few big severe weather outbreaks throughout the spring this year, and I would imagine they are still yet to come, especially once we head into next month. And then obviously beyond that, we get into May and we start talking more in depth about hurricane season. And then we'll obviously be into June and hurricane season will begin. So we have quite a bit to talk about in terms of the next few months. We'll definitely be monitoring it. I'll definitely be monitoring this week's severe weather event. I'll be posting about it on Twitter. If you've not followed me yet, search my name up, Danilo Evangelista, on Twitter, and you'll probably find me then. And if you're not already yet subscribed to my YouTube channel and you want updates on tropics or on severe weather, I'll definitely be posting a severe weather update this week. So make sure to stay tuned for that as well. And obviously, I do other weather videos as well, not just severe weather, and especially not just tropics, although that's what I tend to focus on. But we're also going to do different things depending on what kind of weather happens, trying to mix it up this year. So we'll see. But we definitely have one big event upcoming this week, and that is severe weather towards the end of the week on Friday and Saturday. So we'll be watching that with the hawk's eye for sure. But thanks for watching today's video. That's going to wrap it up for us. If you like what you saw today, I always recommend and encourage you to like, comment, subscribe, share with family and friends. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. And we'll talk again very soon.